Right, Simm's pump. This is the Fordson Major pre-1950, but this is from 1957. I think they done away with it in 59. I might be wrong, but it's the pneumatic model, pneumatic governor, runs off pipes that receive vacuum from the air intake manifold. In this video, I'm hoping to cover pretty much most of the pump for any problems you might have with it. They are a bit temperamental, but other than the governors, they're pretty reliable pumps. As long as you don't play with these screws here or these screws here, you should be right. First of all, you need to remove the front plate, held on with the 8 bolts at the front. And before I take this off, which I've already started, I wanted to show you. In here's the rack, and the rack is what basically these are the elements. In the bottom, there's a camshaft that rotates. The camshaft pushes against the elements, and when the lobes, the high spots of the lobes, push the elements up towards the top of the chambers, that administers the fuel to the injectors basically. I'm not going to waffle too much about that. The amount of fuel that's delivered to the injectors is determined by the travel of the rack, which travels left to right on the, as you can see. As it goes to the left, that's full throttle, that's no throttle, and these at the bottom, they are, I want to say tapered, I might be, whatever the word is, they might be tapered. They're at an angle, so that as these turn, they allow these to travel further or not so far and deliver more or less fuel, depending on where that is in relation to itself, basically. As I mentioned in my previous video, when you go to start these tractors, there's a spring in here in the governor, and the spring always pushes it to full throttle. So that's full throttle. It's natural on full throttle. As you turn it over and it fires, when it ticks over, you'll get a vacuum in the intake manifold. We'll pull against the diaphragm in here, and the spring will then win against the spring and start to pull this back, and you'll find the tick over position. And as you increase the throttle, the rack will move to the left. It'll rev, and then you'll find wherever you've increased the throttle to, and it should govern out. Basically, it works. Now, the problem I'm having is this rack sticking. I'm not even able to pull the stop button back. Several times when I've started the tractor, she's just revved up, loads of smoke coming out of her, spewing diesel out the exhaust. I turn the fuel off and put things over the air intake manifold to starve it of air to be able to basically to stop it. And scares the shit out of me when it's happened. And well, it happened again, and I realised it happened yesterday when I just had the mover, and I realised it's only when I press the cold start. So this is the next subject, we'll get onto this. When you push the cold start button on these pumps, it allows the rack to move to, I call it full throttle, because it's even further than where we'd normally be on full throttle. That would be full throttle. So, in this case, I realised then that she's revving up, and then no matter what I do, I cannot get the rack to go back. It was just physically stuck like solid, and you could hear it was like almost like it was metal on metal. So I had no choice, take the pump off again and go in here, take the end off, and that's where we'll get on, and we try and cover the diaphragm, which is the most thing that usually goes on these. The diaphragms, they perish. There's an old one there from my bonfire pump. There's not out of this one. The one in here was just wrecked, but perished just the same. This one's really had it. This one's looks like it's been on the floor for about 30 years, but you need to remove the bolts in here, the 11mm. 11/16. Sorry, not 11/16. I'll be cube of imperial. They are. They are anyway. They're 11. They fit 11mm fits. Right, off with that. So now your rack is free to move. As you can see, the spring is what gives it full throttle, and my problem's in here. To get in here, you need a screwdriver or a tool. I'll probably do it at the end of the spanner because it's quite a big recess. There's a recess in there. Can you see that right? And then get behind the spring. Take all the clip. Remove the clip carefully because it flies across the room otherwise. Clip, retainer, diaphragm, spring. Now, in the bottom, there's actually two now, and I didn't mean to do that. I put this one because I'd already had this off and sussed that this is a problem with this, and I put it on with 2 bolts merely just to show for this video. That's out of the other one, so we don't need that at the moment. Basically, what happens is, as this one's allowed to go to full throttle, full throttle as we call it, I call it, that spring pushes that out even further than it ever normally seems to go. And for some reason, this sits in a recess in here inside of a little brass collar or a brass bush, and this is what pulls in and out with the vacuum here. Will pull this one in and out. It's like almost like a piston. It's a plunger, a piston, whatever you'd like to call it, and it pushes against the nut on the diaphragm, which is then seated against the spring, and then so on in that chamber as such. Back on itself like that. But you can't see it the other way. That nut is worn. The first time this pin came out, I just came to the conclusion that this pin had been coming out, going against there like this on the end of his travel from inside the. I'll take this out. It's easy to show you. Be careful if you take these out as well to count the number of threads that are exposed here. I think standard they have 2 to 3 threads showing there. You don't want to play with that too much unless you've got too much wear. Mine end up I over it slightly, and basically this sits in here like this with the plunger basically going against there. And what I figured was happening was when it comes to the end of his travel, because he's not sitting square on that one, he's trying to push it to the side, which normally isn't a problem, but for some reason he seemed, first of all I thought he was coming out too far, so I looked at the adjuster at the end of the pump, which people like to play with because they like to open the pumps up to try and get a bit more horsepower out of them and whatever, but do not play with that. That's another screw you don't play with. They're factory set, there's no need to touch them. Do not touch, basically, was what I would advise you on that one. I want you to get a torch now. In there's a brass bush, and you probably can't see it very well, but it's worn over lip tech. It's not worn straight. And my theory on this now is that this is coming out, going to the end, and is wedging like this. At some point it is just coming out just that little bit and wedging. But for him to actually come out and fall into the bottom also shows that there's excessive wear there. So we're going to replace that nut, and I've got a donor one here from this bomb find. I'm going to have to clean it up, but I've got a spare one of these in here, which I know it looks horrendous, but the actual bush in that one is hardly worn, and it's brass, so we'll clean up nice. So we'll go and do that. I'm going to remove this, substitute that for that, put it in there, and then before I go, there's one more thing I'd like to say with these is the elements. Is when you unscrew them, I think they're set to the depth by these screws, which is why I said don't alter them. I may be wrong on that. I've never taken these apart, and going back to these screws that I said do not touch, these are your adjuster screws, which I'm trying to work out how to put it in an easy way for people. These screws alter the amount of travel, basically, that these elements as they go from left to right is the adjustment. And if you get it wrong, then you're delivering too much through, you're going to end up with smoke, you're going to end up running lumpy. I would suggest don't touch them. If you think that you've got any issues with that, take the injection pump off, take it to your nearest city specialist, diesel specialist in the city. Every city seems to have at least 2 or 3 of them. I know Exeter's got loads of them. They don't charge a fortune just to calibrate the pump, they just run it on the bench, spin that around at a certain speed for a certain amount of time, measure the amount administered by all 4 injectors, and then they will play with these if they're out until they get them right and give you your pump back. So don't touch. Basically, if you're watching this video and you've got one of these old pumps, and it's before they introduce the Mimic ones or whatever they're called, your problem's probably the diaphragm anyway. So, and these are quite easily available on eBay. I think I paid about a tenner, something like that for it. You've got Agri Parts UK's, Mayhill Tractors, they're endless, there's loads of them out there, and yeah, don't remember go about them. So I'm going to try and repair that and set it back up, and hopefully this won't happen again. Fill up with the seeds for a spanner, so I beat it out, so I give up and gas it out, so I warm it up until it go there. Well, they shouldn't eat alley like that really, but so it's I've took the diaphragm out, so it's not smoking too much, so tip that way, we don't want to go an hour. Scissors out a bit, so. Keep going. Suppose. Ready? Let's start again then. You have to start again. That didn't go very well. As you see, it loosened off, but then it sheared. It was bloody seized right up, and a bit like the rest of the old pump, which is why I got it. It's just for spares, and so anyway, since I've seen you last on that when I was out in the shed, I've actually diagnosed this pump, and I was actually wrong on this occasion. Now the pin is coming out and falling in the bottom. The nut is worn on the diaphragm. The problem what has arose is this. The old stop mechanism. This is the original one, and she sits in here. Hang on, I've got to try and spring goes in the recess. It goes in like that. Basically sits like that. Hopefully it will stay there so you can see it. Stay. And then inside the cover there's a stop. And this is the throttle stop. The adjustment I was talking about on the pump, not to play with. And I've seen there's a bit of wear on here. And it's made me look a bit further, so I took this out, and I don't know if you can see, but that's flat. So I got the other one out of the old pump. I got a selection of them here. I've got 2 spare ones, but as you see on that one straight away, much more rounded. We can see the difference a mile away. And it's the same with that one, although they are both slightly worn there. They've obviously got their wear. And then on this one here, again, he's quite rounded and worn. Although he's better than that one, I would have said. So then I've got to find the best 2 out of these 2. It's going to be this one. So this will be the one I'm going to replace it with. Obviously, not being funny, I doubt if you haven't got any spare bits lying around, then you might have to go and get somebody if you can't weld yourself. If you know somebody who can fabricate, just to weld it up a bit, file it down, rebuild it basically, just so that it looks like it should, like you would with a ball joint on a gear selector or something. So yeah, that was our problem basically, and I'll try and show you near again how this works a bit more. It took me a minute to work it out. This has got a lot heavier spring on this one. Right, in goes that. Oh, I didn't want to use that because that one's actually the one that's been welded. Somebody's welded that. I'll do this to show you how anyway the stop actually, how this cold stop works. Right, so when he's in there, the rack will slide back with the spring, and the governor will push it that way as far as it can go, which will be up against that stop. And then when the cold start button is pushed, it allows, I don't know if you've seen what actually happened then, it then allows that one to sit back further, which is because this is recessed. And that's basically how the cold stop works. And this is basically allowing it to come back too far, hence why the pin is falling out in here, going like this and just in the bottom of the housing. So I'm about to carry on and make my mind up with which one I'm going to use on these, and then I'll put it back together. I'll see you in a bit. Right, right, where were we? Right, we was going on about the stops. I'd like to show you this actually works a minute. Decided there's the old one, there's a lot of wear. We're talking about the wear on the reins. So I've picked this one, and then they can go in with bits of old injection pump. So there are the elements we were talking about earlier, and these are the chambers that are, as the rack goes back and forth, these are what, that there is what's inside here. These are the plungers that get pushed up and down by the camshaft, and these are, as it's got a little slot across here, and it's got a hole for the delivery. up to the delivery. These are the delivery valves at the top, and as these go from left to right, it basically delivers more or less fuel. It allows more or less fuel to go into the chamber from the bottom, which allows it to then in turn push more fuel out through the delivery valves up through into injectors, and that's basically how that works. But like I said, we're not going to waffle too much about that in this video because that's not what I'm trying to fix. Back to the stop and the cold start. Right. So we'll take this from here and I'll show you this works. It took me a second or two to work this out myself. Although it is quite straightforward. Now I've worked it out. Hopefully that'll stay there. We'll pop the cover on. And then we'll pull the throttle back as if the spring was back as in the start position. Well, that at the moment then, for whatever sake, would be full throttle. And it can only go to there without me pushing it, without it falling off at the moment. And then when you push the cold start, it allows it to move. So this is why. And then obviously I'm going to show you that one, that when you push the button again, or that when it goes back, the button pops out and does what it should. So it is functioning and it's going to be fitted. Anyway, so we pull the rack to the full throttle position, take that off. And they're pretty much lined up. Well, I've established that the one on the right, this side, from where I'm sitting, is purely to push the rack back to the stop. It does nothing else other than that. It purely pushes it back to stop. This one here is the one that sits between the end of the rack. So I'll hold it together and show you that as the rack comes out, it sits on the end of it, sits between that and the stop, which sits inside here. Hang on, nope, sorry, wrong way round. It sits against that and against the end of there, the stop, the travel stop in that end. And this has a bit of wear on it as well, but it's going to go back together like that because it'll still function fine. And basically that's again because of the recess I showed you earlier is how it works. It allows that to go to one side, allows that to go back further, and then the end of the rack itself, the rack rod, what you like to call it, bottoms out on here itself rather than this rounded piece being in between. So that basically is how that works, if that interests anyone. And now I'm going to just put the cover on it with 4 screws. I'll try and get off my ass and find the screwdriver and some bits. Happy to that, so it should be in there. Go push that in against that. Pause that a minute, babe.